You ever have one of those mornings where you know the world just shifts under your feet and you realize nothing's ever going back to normal? That was me staring at my conservation pond, the place I'd poured my heart into for 15 years, smelling this sharp chemical stench so strong it made my eyes water before I even made it to the corner of the house. What hit me next was worse. Dozens of my fish, these endangered Nevada pupfish I'd spent years protecting, just floating belly up, their silver scales catching the morning light in a way that made my stomach drop. The water, usually so clear you could see every pebble, was now this gross industrial gray. For a minute I just stood there, not moving, not thinking, because how do you process that level of loss? And then there was Tom, my neighbor, always up too early for his own good, standing right at the fence line looking like he'd seen a ghost. He just blurted it out, said he'd spotted Karen Hartley, the HOA president, at my fence around 6 a.m., spraying something over into my yard with one of those garden pump sprayers. He said she was muttering about teaching me a lesson and fixing the neighborhood eyesore. I didn't even need to ask who she meant. Karen had been on my case since the day I moved in 3 years ago. Now I bought this place because the backyard was perfect for a conservation pond, and as a licensed caretaker for the state's Endangered Fish Recovery Program, I needed space. That pond was home to about 40 Nevada pupfish, which might not sound like a big deal unless you know there's barely 300 left in the wild. Every single one was irreplaceable, protected by federal law, and I had every permit posted right there on the fence for anyone to see. Of course, none of that ever stopped Karen. She hated the pond, called it unprofessional, swore up and down it was dropping property values, accused me of breeding mosquitoes, even though, irony of ironies, my fish actually ate mosquito larvae for breakfast. She ignored every document I ever showed her, shrugged off every bit of proof that my project was not only legal, it was vital. First came the anonymous complaints, algae smells, whatever she could think of, then bogus citations about landscaping codes that didn't even exist. I got pretty good at writing up official responses, quoting federal conservation law, shooting down her claims one by one. My personal favorite was when she tried to get me for unauthorized water features, and I had to explain again that conservation projects were protected under federal law. Didn't faze her at all. It kept ramping up. Next, she'd show up at my fence with a measuring tape, insisting the pond was too close to the property line. It wasn't. She'd take photos from these wild angles to make the pond look gigantic, then present them at HOA meetings as evidence. I heard through the grapevine she'd spend entire meetings ranting about the dangers of standing water and how I was destroying the neighborhood's reputation. Still, I tried to be the bigger person. I even invited her over, tried to show her how the filtration worked, explained about the native plants, the whole ecosystem. She stood there, arms crossed, looking like she smelled something rotten, and said, "This is a respectable neighborhood, not a zoo." She warned me plain as day that if I didn't get rid of the pond, she'd sanitize my yard herself. I laughed at the time, thought she was just being dramatic. But I put in security cameras the very next week just in case. My girlfriend said I was being paranoid. Guess who was right? A few weeks went by and things actually got quiet. No more surprise fence inspections, no new complaints. I started to think maybe Karen had finally found a new hobby. Turns out her new hobby was figuring out what chemical would kill fish the fastest. She'd been researching on her home computer no less about restricted pesticides, what would wipe out my pond in one shot. That morning I dialed 911 with one hand and called the state wildlife department with the other. The police operator seemed almost confused when I said someone had committed an environmental crime, but the wildlife folks took it real serious. Within 2 hours, my backyard was crawling with professionals testing water, taking samples, documenting the damage. Dr. Reeves, the lead investigator, told me point blank the water's pH was shot and there were sky-high levels of copper sulfate so lethal it could wipe out a pond in minutes. You needed a special license just to buy the stuff. And guess what? Karen had one. Well, her brother did, but more on that later. While they worked, I pulled up the security footage, heart-pounding, hoping maybe I was wrong. Nope. There she was, clear as day, Karen in her purple tracksuit, hauling a commercial-grade sprayer over my fence at 5:47 a.m., methodically pumping chemicals into the pond. She even paused, made sure she got every corner, then walked off with this weird, satisfied smile. Dr. Reeves watched the footage, and her jaw actually clenched. She told me what Karen had done wasn't just vandalism, it was a federal crime and not a small one. She could be looking at real jail time and massive fines. I lost 41 of my 43 Nevada pupfish that day. For insurance, each fish was valued at about $1, $200, but the truth is, their genetic value, their ecological value, was way more than that. Karen didn't just destroy my project, she wiped out years of research and bloodlines that had survived millennia. Cops rolled up to Karen's house later that afternoon. I wasn't there, but Tom's buddy Mark was, and he called me play-by-play. Said Karen tried to put on her usual who me act until she saw the uniforms and the legal paperwork. They hit her with charges: criminal destruction of protected wildlife, illegal chemical use, trespassing, and vandalizing a conservation site. Added up, fish pond, restoration, hazardous waste disposal, lost research, it came out to almost $54,000 in damages, not counting the federal fines. Karen predictably tried to weasel her way out. At the emergency HOA meeting, she claimed someone had stolen her sprayer and framed her. When they showed the security footage, she switched stories, said she was just spraying for mosquitoes and didn't know it would harm the fish. Sure. The investigation found out she'd special ordered the copper sulfate with her brother's agricultural license and had actually posted online in a gardening forum asking hypothetically how to get rid of a neighbor's pond. Classic Karen Wright. As the news spread, it turned out I wasn't her only victim. The Johnsons had to tear down their kid's playhouse for being the wrong shade of beige. Mrs. Chen had to dig up her vegetable garden because it wasn't approved landscaping. The list kept growing. People started coming out of the woodwork, all with their own Karen stories. She'd been terrorizing the whole neighborhood for years. Court day came faster than I expected. Karen showed up in this expensive suit flanked by a lawyer who looked like he regretted his life choices. Witness after witness got up, told the court about the pond, about Karen's threats, and finally they played the footage. You could feel the room shift. Her lawyer actually slumped. The judge didn't waste any time. He said ignorance wasn't an excuse, especially with all the signs and permits up. He ordered Karen to pay full restitution, every penny, plus another $20,000 in environmental fines, 200 hours of community service at the Wildlife Department, and 3 years probation. If she messed up again, she was going straight to jail. But honestly, that was just the start. The HOA held an emergency vote to kick her out as president, passed unanimously. Her real estate firm fired her after the story made the local papers. The state yanked her brother's license for sharing restricted chemicals. Even her country club gave her the boot. And then here's the twist: the state wildlife department made my backyard an official wildlife refuge. Seriously. That meant the HOA couldn't touch the pond, and nothing, no landscaping, no chemical application could happen within 100 feet without federal permission. I used Karen's restitution to build a bigger, better pond with a 10-foot privacy fence, security, floodlights, the works. School groups started visiting the state, sent a part-time researcher. My backyard became a model for conservation projects nationwide. Meanwhile, Karen had to watch all of this unfold powerless because the restraining order meant she couldn't come within 50 feet of my property. Sometimes I'd catch her peeking out her kitchen window, watching school kids and scientists tour the pond she'd tried so hard to destroy. Poetic justice, right? She had to do her court-ordered community service at the Wildlife Center. Her first day, she spent it complaining about the smell, tried to get reassigned. But by the end of her 200 hours, she wasn't complaining anymore. She actually seemed to care about the animals, started asking questions, helping out for real. The last HOA meeting she ever attended was almost cinematic. She stood at the podium, voice shaking, trying to justify her actions, talking about property values. Someone asked how poisoning endangered fish protected anything. She didn't have an answer. The vote to remove her wasn't even close: 43 votes for removal, 0 against 1 for each fish she'd killed. As they walked her out, she looked back at me. No hate, just defeat. She opened her mouth to say something, then just turned and left. That was it. Her reign was over, not with a bang, but with the whole neighborhood finally saying enough. The new HOA president tore up all of Karen's ridiculous rules. The Johnsons rebuilt their playhouse, this time in whatever color they wanted. Mrs. Chen's garden came back bigger and brighter. The whole place just felt lighter, like we'd finally shaken off this giant shadow. 6 months after the verdict, I got a letter from the federal prosecutor. Karen had finished paying off her fines and done her service. She'd also made a surprise donation, $10,000, to the Nevada Pupfish Conservation Fund. with a note saying she finally understood what she'd almost destroyed. I never wrote back some bridges stay burned. But I did notice she kept volunteering at the wildlife center, even after her court hours were up. Maybe she changed, maybe she just needed something to do that didn't involve terrorizing her neighbors. Either way, my pond is safe, the fish are thriving, and Karen Hartley will never run another HOA. Funny how it works out. Her attempt to destroy my conservation project ended up saving it forever. That's real federal protection right there. As I stand by the pond at dusk watching the new generation of pupfish dart around, sometimes I think about sending her a picture not to rub it in just to show her what survived. But I don't. I remember the look on her face when the judge handed down the verdict, and that's enough. Karen learned the hard way. Some things are bigger than property values, bigger than neighborhood rules. Sometimes when you try to wipe something out, you just make it stronger. So, what do you think, was justice served, or does the system go too easy on folks like Karen? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, I'm still not sure myself.